them at the worst parts, the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and there is no victor. There is only doom. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release, but only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's sometimes a challenge, but always a good time. And this week, we are talking the 2015 film Fantastic Four. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by the man with other dimensional comic book recall, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am very ready for this. This is something that I feel like I watched at least once before, but it felt like a whole new experience sitting down and watching it again.
Looking for the positives, right?
Yes, of course. That's what we do here on Best of the Rest.
Changes the way that we look at movies. I can say I had never seen this movie until this week, preparing to record this episode. I certainly knew of its reputation. I kind of avoided it for that reason. And boy, was this an experience. It was, we've been compiling the list of movies that we've got to cover. This was an early one to put on there. We made a decision to cover the first two movies first, that Chris Evans series. And I enjoyed both of those movies. We've talked about them. They got their own episodes. And, we covered both of those. And inevitably, we had to jump to this one. And, man, what a jump that is.
What a jump. What a jump.
Quite a different take on the characters. We will say that. But you know what? This episode, we are going to have a conversation all about what the movie does well. This is, of course, a hashtag positivity podcast. That is what we do. Like I say in the intro, it is sometimes a challenge. I think we might be a bit challenged this episode, but I've got faith that we can do it. And you know what? We might be the first people in the history of the internet, Andrew, to try to have a positive conversation about this movie. It's been talked about a lot, usually not for the things that it does well.
Yeah, the cast and crew have all pretty much disowned this. The pretty much anybody that saw this and or was involved in this has spoken usually at best about how it's not what they intended. It didn't come out the way they really kind of were expecting, or at worst they just say it's bad. So we today might be doing the impossible or boldly going where no one has gone before.
That's right. This movie released on August 7th, 2015 on a budget of $150 million. At the box office, it brings in $168 million, barely covering that budget, but definitely losing money for the studio. Critically, this movie is absolutely panned.
It is ripped apart.
A 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Andrew, this is the lowest critic score we've come across in the history of this show.
So to clarify for you folks, that means this is lower than Batman and Robin. This is lower than both of the Ghost Riders. This is lower than Daredevil. This is lower than Superman 3 and 4. We're talking
lower than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3.
We're talking the proverbial cream of the crop when it comes to badly reviewed superhero movies.
Yeah, single digits. It's just crazy. Rarely happens, especially 2015. Newer movies like this get more reviews compiled into the percentage, and usually that helps it out a little bit. But even with 261 critic reviews, just a 9%.
No one left. Well, I take it back. Apparently, 9% of critics went here first. So we're not completely treading in unknown territory.
The audience score, which is typically a little bit higher than the critic score, was not much more forgiving. Audiences give this just an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. Got our work cut out for us, Andrew.
We do indeed. Woof.
Let's get a little bit of background to this movie. It is written and directed by Josh Trank. Now, the written part gets a little bit shaky. We'll jump into it in a second, but let's talk about Josh Trank for a second. Essentially, he's getting this movie solely off of his film, Chronicle.
Yep.
I like Chronicle. I saw that in theaters.
Sure.
I haven't watched it again since then, but I enjoyed it. It was different. It was combining sort of obviously we're in the thick of the superhero renaissance at this time, the time when the Chronicle comes out. It sort of combines the found footage genre of movies, and it's a bit of a deconstruction of the superhero, sort of like, what would really happen in real life if kids got superpowers? Would it go as well as we see in these spandex comic books? The answer was no.
Yes, definitely not.
But it might be the first thing I saw Michael B. Jordan in. He's great in that movie. I really like the movie.
Yeah.
I can understand seeing Chronicle and thinking, hey, we should give this guy a licensed character.
And people certainly tried, to be very clear there.
I don't think Fantastic Four would be the first license I would think of to give to this guy.
Certainly not. But I can definitely see how a movie he made about kids with superpowers would definitely lead to people being like, yeah, give him a superhero movie.
Josh Trank would later write and direct Capone, starring Tom Hardy. I have not caught that one yet, Andrew. Have you seen Capone?
I have.
Enough said?
Maybe when this show branches out of superheroes. No, but like I said, I just want to touch on that a little bit. He definitely was offered superheroes in the aftermath of this. I do believe he was one of the people that was approached for the original when Sony was first talking about doing Venom. Even outside superheroes, Warner Brothers was doing something called the Red Star he was attached to, an adaptation of the video game Shadow of the Colossus. Notably, he was actually announced as a director of a standalone Star Wars project. This ends up not coming to pass. By all indications, it was going to be a Boba Fett movie. That seems to be the general talk. And he announced that he was stepping away. It was a personal decision. Later stories indicated that his behavior on other films may have played a part in that. That's for others to decide. But needless to say, at this point, Trank is I don't quite think he blew up the way people thought he was going to.
That's a good way to put it, I guess. Now, the movie is ultimately written by Josh Trank, among others. Let's break this down a little bit. Originally, there was a script by Jeremy Slater. Now, Jeremy Slater doesn't have many credits before this, but would later go on to be a writer on Umbrella Academy, which is a show I know a lot of people very much enjoy. Personally, I haven't checked it out yet. Andrew, you watch Umbrella Academy?
I've seen the first season. Very good. Definitely something that nails the tone of those comics, I think. Something else he did that I was actually a big fan of was the Exorcist television show that came on in 2016. It's a bit of a stealth sequel to The Exorcist. I thought that flew under the radar, was a little underrated. And then he's actually going to be doing the upcoming Oscar Isaac Moon Knight series on Disney Plus. So
pretty excited about that one. That'll be cool.
This he's managed to do pretty well for himself, despite some of the others here.
Yeah. So once Josh Trank comes in, he all but throws the script out. He heavily rewrites it and changes the tone of the movie. There are some clashes with Jeremy Slater, and he completely leaves production. Enough of his work was left in there to receive a credit, but it doesn't sound like he's got much to do with the film we eventually saw in theaters.
No.
The script would later have rewrites by Simon Kinberg, who we've talked about quite a bit, has done extensive work in the X-Men franchise, including writing on several of the movies and eventually making his directorial debut with X-Men Dark Phoenix.
Yeah, Kinberg comes in. There's even some greater stories that indicate the reshoots of this movie were also directed by Simon Kinberg, mostly because I think Trank had left production at that point. So Kinberg, I think, ends up having a hand definitely in how this movie gets to the screen. But yeah, apparently Trank just really didn't like Slater's script. Slater was apparently using Avengers kind of as his template, and that just really wasn't how Trank saw the final film, which watching the final film, you could definitely see that I would not say Avengers is the template it's using.
No.
And then Kinberg, I think, was brought in at the end for the studio when the studio started making some demands, because to say this movie has a bit of a turbulent production is a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. But you know what? Sometimes turbulent productions can result in some pretty good movies, right?
They can.
Blade Runner and the sequel, Blade Runner 2049, both have a lot of trouble getting made. Mad Max Fury Road, we've called that the greatest movie of all time, and it was a nightmare to make. Would that be the case here? No, but
We'll find out.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. I should preserve some of the mystery, I guess.
Yes.
Because people don't know this movie has a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes.
No, they don't.
Let's get into it. Let's jump into the story this movie is telling. As a child, Reed Richards, along with best friend Ben Grimm, develops a homemade machine capable of transporting objects across space. At a high school science fair, the machine catches the attention of Franklin Storm and his daughter Sue, who developed a similar device and believe the design can be improved with Reed's help. The young team develops a machine large enough to transport humans, with the help of Sue's brother Johnny and another prodigy named Victor Von Doom. When it's discovered that the new machine is capable of sending life to another dimension, the young team transports themselves in secret, and an accident in the other world leaves Reed, Ben, Johnny, and Sue with extraordinary powers here on Earth, and Victor stranded in another dimension. The young team spends the next year discovering how to harness their new abilities until Victor returns to our planet intent on destroying the world that left him behind. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about, Andrew, of course, is the cast of this movie. And we're going to start at the high point, at the top, at the peak, with the best performance of the movie. We're looking for one actor or actress that goes so far above and beyond what is being asked of them that they actually raise the quality of the entire movie. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. And that person for me is Reggie Cathy, who plays Franklin Storm. He's getting my Mark Strong Award for his performance in this movie. Now, first of all, before I get to his performance, this name is amazing. It's Reg, R-E-G, E, middle initial E, Cathy. But you pronounce it, of course, Reggie Cathy. But his first name is Reginald, which can already be abbreviated to Reggie. So this man is just going for style points with that name. Yep. And you know what? I'm here for it. I like it. I appreciate it. Sadly, he did pass away February of 2018 at age 59 due to lung cancer. So first and foremost, respectfully, R.I.P. Reggie Cathy. But I really like the performance he's giving here as Franklin Storm. For one, the man just had a wonderful voice full of gravitas, which is a word that I don't use lightly, folks.
No, not at all. Not on this show.
I love the way he talks. Normally, I mean, he his credits go way back. Worked for decades. Appeared in tons of movies. The Mask might be the thing I know him the most from. He plays one of the bad guys there, and normally it's kind of what he's using that gravelly voice he has for is to play like a bad guy. Who could forget his turn in Airheads? He also shows up in Tank Girl. So odds are we'll talk about him again on another episode.
One day, yes.
Credits in Seven, American Psycho. Actually, this fairly recent movie called Saint Vincent with Bill Murray.
Bill Murray, yeah.
Very, very good movie.
Very good. I like that one
I think, I think it flew under the radar. So I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Saint Vincent. But at any rate, what he's doing in this movie, he's obviously Sue and Johnny's dad. But by the end of the movie, or at least by the end of his part in the movie, because the character does die, he's kind of a surrogate father to all of the characters. What I love the most that this character does is he calls all the kids son or daughter in the case of Sue. But even like Reed Richards, who is not his kid at all, he works for him. He's very paternal in that way, and he yes. calls him son, and he's very loving. This movie, this isn't attacking the movie. It's kind of just how it is. It's very dark and honestly pretty cynical. It's pretty grim, no pun intended. But he manages to bring a bit of levity, a bit of warmth that is greatly needed in this movie. It's great. I loved every scene that he was in. I think he nailed the part. He brought what needed to be brought to this movie, and genuinely, that performance elevates the film for me.
I think I'm going to have to agree. I think he's definitely the one that's acting kind of as the anchor to everything that's happening in this film. Like, he's obviously the precipice for our core group being together. He's the one that brings Reed into the Baxter building. He's the one that gets Victor to come back. Obviously, he's the one that he literally is the one who puts this team together outside Ben. He's also the one that brings his son back in. Like you said, there's a There's a paternal sense that he brings to everything. Obviously, this is a character we've not seen on screen before. This character is not present in the Tim Story films. So to see this new character brought to life in a new way, in a way that anchors this whole thing, is pretty great. And like you said, the performance he's giving here genuinely makes this film better.
And then, of course, we have the team itself. Let's start with Miles Teller, who plays Reed Richards. Now, this movie is telling the origin of the Fantastic Four. All of these are much younger characters and actors than we typically see of this team, and definitely than we saw in those first two movies that other franchise this movie is rebooting. Miles Teller, first of all, does Whiplash the year before, which is a great movie. Love it.
Yes.
And I think Hollywood sort of saw that movie and saw that breakout performance and was like, okay, this is the guy. And they just put him in everything. I mean, he was obviously eyed as being like the next big thing, the next leading man. So he's in, of course, this. He's the star of a prestige, high budget superhero movie. He gets put in the Divergent movies. He is in War Dogs, which is sort of, Todd Phillips' breakaway from comedy. He's in the Bleed for This, which is a classic, prestige boxing movie, an obvious Oscar play. I mean, this guy has more vehicles than Jay Leno.
And they're not stopping, because now he's in the upcoming Top Gun sequel, which will get released someday, I'm sure.
Someday, but hang on, Andrew, you're shortchanging me here. More vehicles than Jay Leno. Then might have been a laugh track. It's okay. So Jay Leno, in case you don't know, guys, Jay Leno collects cars. He has a lot of vehicles, and vehicle is also a term used when a movie is designed to further the career of one of the actors. So he's been the star of a lot of Hollywood movies. Jay Leno collects cars. He's got more vehicles than Jay Leno. Now that I've explained it, we can all laugh. Wait, wrong.
Top 10 jokes Chris has made that Andrew didn't laugh at. Number 1.
Anyway, his performance in this movie, he's good. He's a young guy. Yeah. He's smart. He's doing what's asked of him. He's not elevating the film. #positivity podcast. I'm not gonna go hard on him or anything. He's not doing anything bad or anything I dislike, but he's viable. What is there to say? He's believable as a young genius.
He is. Later in the film, he ends up kind of on the run. He doesn't look out of place anywhere. I never feel like he's not the guy for the part. I don't feel like he's miscast. If you're going to say that there's failures in this movie, I don't think any of it is with the cast. I think they're all cast pretty well. Obviously, we know he's capable of intense performances, stuff like Whiplash. I also really like Only the Brave, which is a firefighter movie he does with Josh Brolin. So, I mean, he's got the chops. Like I said, here, you're maybe not seeing the chops, but I think he's, like you said, he's doing what's asked of him. And I think, what more can you ask?
Yeah, the movie's maybe not seeing the chops. He doesn't have to stretch his abilities too far to play the role. Okay. Michael B. Jordan plays Johnny Storm. And I, like everyone else on this planet, love Michael B. Jordan. I like this casting as Johnny Storm. I mean, it's quite a bit different, of course, than the Chris Evans casting. Aside from casting a black man in the role, the characterization is obviously very different. He's not wisecracking the entire movie, although he does seem a little bit more spontaneous than the rest of the team. So he's still Johnny Storm. He's still, that
very much so
wild team member here. Michael B. Jordan, of course, no stranger to the comic books movies these days, would later star in Black Panther as the villain Killmonger. I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but that's my Mark Strong Award winner for Black Panther.
It's not that bad. He also, oddly, 2 years before this, was voiced Cyborg in one of those Justice League animated films as well. So, so he's definitely no stranger. Obviously, Creed becoming his big, potentially his actual breakout performance in the year 2015.
Same year. Love. I mean, Rocky Balboa is my favorite movie character of all time. I love the entire franchise. I love Creed. I think that is a genius way to do a extension of the franchise, legacy sequel, whatever you want to call it. Great. His performance in that movie is also very good. I think it caught a lot of people's attention in 2013 with Fruitvale Station.
Yep.
A movie that I hear is extremely good. I'm not sure I will ever bring myself to watch it because I don't know if I want to ruin that day of my life, but
it can be a tough watch.
Yeah.
An important watch, but a tough one nonetheless. I think you're shortchanging his greatest role of all time, though.
I cannot wait to hear the sincere answer you're about to give, Andrew.
He features as Jamal in the Keanu Reeves vehicle Hardball.
Whoa, that's him?
Yep.
I didn't even.
2001.
Man, speaking of movies that'll ruin your day, that's a tough watch too. But wow, that's awesome. I haven't rewatched that movie in a long time. If you've seen it, you probably know why. It's not that it's bad. But I've got to go back now because I did not realize Michael B. Jordan is that. That's awesome. I was thinking about Michael B. Jordan the other day, as you do.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, sort of like Reggie Cathy gets credited the way he does. I was like, why does Michael B. Jordan get credited as Michael B. Jordan? And then I realized that if he didn't have a B in there, he would just be Michael Jordan. And that's probably
You just got there? You just got there?
It wasn't today. It was the other day, but it took me a minute. And I realized that B is doing a lot of work.
Yeah, it's doing a lot of work. There is literally a whole gag in the new Space Jam built around that.
Believe it or not, Andrew, I have not watched the new Space Jam.
You and many others.
Kate Mara plays Sue Storm. Again, no stranger to superhero movies. I mean, it's honestly hard to find actors that are strangers to superhero movies. She's also in Iron Man 2, has a significant part there. Other credits include 127 Hours. Later, after this movie, it would also be in The Martian, which is a very good movie.
Very good.
I don't know if I can sit here and say it's the best Ridley Scott movie because he's made some pretty good movies, but it is top tier. It is.
I would say it's the top tier of his later career. Absolutely.
Yes.
She also features in the pseudo superhero vehicle Zoom from 2006, starring Tim Allen.
I'm sure it's great.
It's not. One day we'll talk about that, folks.
I think she does a good job here. The script is kind of what's called for. It doesn't give her an opportunity to be happy, to smile. I mean, this movie, it's bleak, it's dark, it's cynical. It's what's being asked. And I some of the characters get a chance to show a little bit of levity, like Michael B. Jordan as Johnny Storm. It never really gets around to her. So she's very pensive most of the movie. And I wish she had a chance to relax a little bit. But again, we'll probably be saying this a lot this episode. She's doing what's asked of her.
Yeah, it's you don't really dive the mechanics of the team are not really dived into a whole lot here, especially after they get powers. What we get of Sue mostly is before the accident, because this movie really is kind of two halves. There's before the accident and after the accident, and they can feel like two very different films at times, very much indicative of the sort of production troubles you hear. But in that build up to the accident, they're working on this project, and there's not a whole lot given there as far as development of the team, development of relationships. You get the couple of clips of them like working together and interacting together, but you don't really see a whole lot more there. So, but what she has, she's very good at. She's kind of if there is a center to the team, I actually think it's more her than anyone. She's the one that, like, when they're in this that's not the negative zone, she's the one that gets them and brings them back. She's kind of the level head between Reed and Victor at the same time. So she doesn't get a whole lot, but what she does get, she makes the most of.
One thing I do appreciate is that the movie, it doesn't do, I mean, we all know that Reed Richards and Sue Storm end up together and get married, but it doesn't jump into love at first sight, falling for each other, meet cutes, all that good stuff. More so, the relationship is defined by a friendly rivalry as far as who's the real brains of the team. And I thought that was a good angle to go at. And I think she does a good job playing that part.
I agree.
Jamie Bell plays Ben Grimm. Other than this, what I most know him from is The Adventures of Tintin.
Absolutely.
He plays the lead character. He plays Tintin. one of Steven Spielberg's most underrated movies. It's
100%.
it's very, very good. Legit
Very good.
fantastic action sequences, even though the movie is animated, but it's a strange animation. If you haven't seen it, just go see it. It's one of a kind.
It's so unbelievably good. And like you said, that's one of those ones that kind of annoys me how much people don't talk about it. Because like, especially when it comes to like computer animated stuff of the same name, like it's so good and doesn't feel nearly as dated, I think, as something like Polar Express does. But yeah, so good. Great script. I know there were supposed to be so many more of those and they never came. And it makes me sad.
And every now and then he talks about it. Steven Spielberg. He's like, "Oh yeah, it might happen. We have an idea. There's a script." He just keeps our hope alive.
Well, because the sequel, I think, was supposed to be
doubtful.
directed by Peter Jackson. He was supposed to direct the sequel, which means there's an even less chance of it happening now. So,
Yeah.
Because if it's one person who signs on and makes less movies than Spielberg, it's probably Peter Jackson or
Yeah.
Guillermo del Toro. But who
That's
knows?
the other one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at any rate, in this movie, should I say it or should you say it? He does what's asked of him. He's the friend of Reed Richards. He is not necessarily like a genius himself in this iteration. He sort of just befriends Reed Richards at the right time and gives him support throughout his life and is always there at his side. But he does not get hired to work on this project. He actually only gets his powers because Reed Richards invites him to go on the trip to the other dimension because, yeah, that's what you do for your buddies.
It is. I do like the kind of, we do see the genesis of Reed and Ben's relationship. Reed is basically trying to build kind of a proto version of this, what he calls a teleporter, in elementary school. And he ends up trying to get a power converter at the junkyard that Ben Grimm's family owns. And Ben takes a liking to him. They don't really dive into so much why, but Ben ends up being there when he makes the first test of this device and apparently is with him till the end. So I'm not going to lie. The fact that he doesn't get invited, he's getting a little shafted there if he's been there the whole time. So
It's true. And then as the Thing, they immediately go towards, there's like a falling out with the team, and him and Reed are at odds. And so this version of the Thing is very much angry and pensive and moody. And he handles that transition well, about as well as you can.
yeah, they put a wrinkle there because in the aftermath of them getting their powers, they are kind of all studied, basically. And so Reed ends up escaping, though, and does not come back. And Ben, having been told by Reed that he's going to fix this, takes his exit and subsequent non-reappearance as abandonment. So he takes it personally and is actually the one who ends up brings Reed back. No one say gets him to come back, but headbutts him and knocks him out and brings him back.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do like the Thing effects here. It's not smooth, symmetrical like the Tim Story films go practical for the Thing. So there's this very kind of smooth, polished look to it at times. By going CG, it looks like a golem, just a disparate pile of rocks that are in a humanoid form, which is a cool look. And obviously, I mean, I assume that's how you would do it in this day and age anyway. But I do think that's a cool look. I kind of like how the Thing is born, where it's really he's just this pile of rocks that eventually learns how to walk. Like he has to break himself out of the rocks. I think that was a nice little twist on his origin to make it to just kind of, I really don't even know what to call it, but like when they see him the first time, he's just this pile of rocks. And then when Reed runs into him later, he's like breaking himself out of these things to kind of have this humanoid form. And yeah, it's a little, I can definitely see the Cronenberg influence in something like that. Definitely a Fly type, Scanners type situation, a little bit of body horror, but I do think that works out I think that's a cool effect that you could use regardless.
I agree. I like
here.
I like the design, and I feel like this isn't an insult at the movie. I like that the Thing is ugly because that's a big part of the character. Now, granted, if you're made out of rock, it doesn't matter how polished you look, you're going to be upset. But they go one step further, and he's an ugly rock person, right? He's he's asymmetrical. His face is kind of shaped strangely. Honestly, his head kind of looks like Snoke from Star Wars, where he's got, like these
Yeah, a
skinny
little bit.
cheeks and then like the cheekbones stick out really far. I did not like that he was naked. I don't like a naked thing.
Yeah.
Put some trunks on him. I know that you want to separate yourself from like the other iterations, but just give him pants instead of trunks or something. Don't make him naked.
Give the man some dignity.
Toby Cabell plays Victor Von Doom. Toby is no stranger to playing the villain.
Nope.
Because he is also Koba in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War of the Planet of the Apes, which is a fantastic villain. Evil monkey. He does a good job there. Later, he shows up in Bloodshot. So, we might be talking about this guy again on a future episode. But I like the performance he gives here. Victor Von Doom. I've said it on our previous Fantastic Four episodes, but like you read that name and like, of course, this dude is a bad guy. It's being telegraphed in his very name, but he's not super over the top. He's not egomaniacal. He's not screaming. In fact, he stays pretty calm. His demeanor is pretty calm. Even after he becomes a full-on villain and transforms into Dr. Doom and has these powers, he always has like this calmness, which I find more menacing and intimidating than if he was screaming. So I like the way that he plays the character.
No, I agree. Like I said, you're given more of a, like I said, not really maniacal, but a lot more like you get the jealousy. Obviously, you see that because obviously Victor sees some interactions between Reed and Sue and gets a little like there's one sequence where he pulls him aside and he's like, "You're not being professional." And it's just like, none of you are being professional. Have you been watching this movie so far, Victor? Come on. But so you get some hints of that, but beyond that, like you said, he's not like cartoonishly over the top. He's not even like Julian McMahon and the other ones where like you're clearly like, yeah, this dude's a bad guy and he's also kind of a dick. Pardon my French. But in this one, he's playing it more limited. Like in the early scenes, you don't feel like he's at odds with this team. You feel like they're all basically on the same page trying to do this thing, even if Victor does have kind of his own ego about him.
Tim Blake Nelson plays Dr. Harvey Allen. Essentially, he works for the military. I don't know if it ever gets into like specific branches or whatever, but he works for the, the evil government of our nation.
He reminds me of Tim Curry in The Shadow, where he was like liaison to the War Department, just like some generic title where you're like, I don't know what this means, but I assume you're just filling the military role.
His goal is to use their device as well as their powers, once they get them, as weapons, as tools for the military to carry out secret covert missions. It's a bit jarring at first when you see him like in the suit, in this boardroom, because I think of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where he is just an absolute goofball.
Yep.
Excellent movie. Probably my favorite Coen Brothers movie, but it's a far cry from that. Also, again, like everybody else, no stranger to superhero movies. He's in The Incredible Hulk as the character that presumably will become the leader. It'll be interesting to see if Marvel gets it back around to that one and brings him back.
They're bringing everybody else in that movie back slowly but surely, except Edward Norton. So maybe one day he'll get his time in the sun. But yeah, it's definitely one of the earliest things I remember him from is Heavyweights, where he shows up at the beginning as like the sales pitch guy for this kid's fat camp, for lack of a better word. And he's just like, he's such a used car salesman in that brief role, but this is so very different. He's playing it almost completely straight, almost just like I said, very against type for him. But
yes,
yeah,
but his character is still very much like a weasel. He's very much like going behind your back and under the table dealings and things like that. And, eventually he gets what's coming to him.
The thing that's interesting, he's one of those other characters. Doom and his character are two of the ones that definitely feel like changes were made, because Doom was originally going to have a completely different name in this movie. I remember that was one of the controversies about it earlier. So I think his name was going to be like Victor Domashev, and then he was going to become Dr. Doom later in the film. But I remember reading about when Tim Blake Nelson was cast, and they were saying he was going to be Harvey Elder instead of Harvey Allen. And the key there is that Harvey Elder becomes the Mole Man, who is a classic Fantastic Four villain. So it felt like they were So this is apparently the second time Tim Blake Nelson got cast as somebody who was supposed to become a villain, and he never actually got to do it.
that covers the main players of this movie. Andrew, is there anybody else in this movie that you want to call out? Any other strange off the wall castings for bit parts?
All three of the other castings are strange off the wall bit parts, but the one in particular that I think we're talking about is Homer Simpson himself. Dan Castellaneta portrays Mr. Kenny, who is one of Reed's teachers, who's needlessly antagonistic for his part in this movie.
He's so mean. Reed is like this genius who's excited about science and inventing this teleportation machine. And he's just like, is it next to your flying car?
Like, yeah. And then like they actually demonstrate it. And he's like, you're disqualified. This is a science fair, not a magic show. And I'm like, what the heck is your problem, man?
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not in the movie very long. He shows up twice. But I do find it funny that Ben Grimm's older brother is played by Chet Hanks in a bit part. And then Tim Heidecker of Tim and Eric fame plays Reed's stepfather in literally a shot that lasts like 20 seconds. So just some all the bit parts.
You're running right over Chet Hanks. We should mention why is that significant. He's obviously brother of Colin Hanks.
Exactly. Is there some? I assume that was a given. I didn't.
I guess the last name Hanks. You understand? He's probably related to Colin Hanks. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely nothing else famous about that family, though. That's for sure. But yeah, just some weird bit parts filled by some strange names.
Andrew, I think it's time. We talk about this movie. We talk about certain scenes of the movie, specifically the best scenes in the movie. When does this movie actually work? We're going to dig for all those positives. And of course, start at the high point with the best scene of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, what's the best scene of Fantastic Four?
I'm going to go with the sequence in which they encounter Planet Zero for the first time. This is basically the culmination of their work building this. They believe it's a teleportation device, but then realize that it's actually kind of a dimensional shuttle almost. But they test it out on a monkey who comes back successfully. But then
a quick aside about that. Whenever the monkeys came back, were you also expecting the monkeys to like explode or something? Or like something go wrong?
I very much was. I was really waiting for something awful to happen to that monkey. Kind of glad it didn't, to be fair. But in the aftermath of that, Tim Blake Nelson's character tells them they're going to bring in like astronauts to do this now. The team that built this will not get to do it. And they have this kind of drunken rally where they kind of realize, well, if anyone's going to do it, it should be us. And so Reed, Victor, and Johnny call in Ben to test out the machine and go themselves. And I was originally curious how Sue was going to factor into this, but she ends up being a part when they come back. But this sequence, I think it's kind of cool. They definitely make this place feel weird, not necessarily alien, but definitely different. Like there's this green energy that like runs under the ground as you walk around. Just a cool looking effect.
The planet, the other dimension, is apparently filled with the emerald energy of willpower.
If only they'd harnessed that, we wouldn't have any issues. This would be a very different. Now we're failing two franchises at once. But hashtag positivity podcast. But I just like it because I like when they go to a different place and there's things about it that just make it feel different. And this is a place that feels different. They kind of comment on like how it looks like a primordial Earth where there's a lot of sharp edges. Things haven't been worn down over time by wind, water, things like that. But then there's this energy. We never really find out what this energy is, but it ends up being the thing that kind of transports them and gives them powers. But like the scene where they're walking around and like the energy is crackling and growing under their feet, I just thought that was all really cool. Like I said, this is ultimately the sequence in which they get their powers, which comes legitimately almost an hour into this movie. It takes a long time to get here, but then obviously Victor falls into this giant pool of the stuff and gets left behind. Ben kind of gets exposed and covered in like rocks, and like Johnny gets lit on fire. So like they're all kind of manifesting their powers like as everything's going wrong and they're getting transported back. And as they get transported back, that's when Sue gets hit with a wave of this stuff that comes through with them and gets her powers. But it's the first moment that we're kind of seeing some of the comic book side of this. And I just think it's a cool alien world that just builds it up and gives us the Fantastic Four. So I think it's a fun scene. Not fun, but it's a cool scene.
Yeah, you're going in this movie, it's the Fantastic Four, they're all gonna get powers, what those powers are gonna be, Victor Von Doom is the bad guy, and you're kind of just wondering how it's all gonna happen because they're obviously doing stuff
Right.
different than the traditional take. And it is interesting because 4 of them go to this other planet, which does not include Sue, but Sue has to get powers, and Victor's with them. So there's a lot of mystery here. Going to a Fantastic Four movie, you think you know how it's all going to play out, and this is one instance where they're really mixing things up. So at the very least, it's fun just to kind of see how it's all going to play out.
Right.
This is where Victor gets, because the green energy sort of like explodes like a volcano, like lava, covers Victor. He falls seemingly to his death, which I wasn't expecting. And then we're also wondering, Sue's not there. So I'm like, are they going to go back home and then travel back looking for Victor and bring Sue? And that's when they get powers. So trying to figure out how they're going to do it all and watch it all go wrong was, again, I'm struggling to find the word because I don't want to say it was fun. It's not a fun time. It's kind of a scary, intense time, but it was interesting watching that all play out. They get back into that shuttle and they have trouble closing the door. And of course, like Ben Grimm's little compartment gets filled with the rocks that shoot in, and a fire bursts into to Johnny's capsule, and they get teleported back. Sue brings them back, and like this blast comes back with them. Like as soon as they appear back on Earth, there's this big blast that hits Sue, and with that force field, and that's how she gets her powers, of course. Interesting for sure. I like the lead up to that because they want to be the ones to be the first ones to go to the other dimension. And Victor says, like, you know who Neil Armstrong is, you know who Buzz Aldrin is, but do you know the name of the people that made the rockets? No. And I bet somebody watching this movie knew the name of it and didn't understand the point of that speech. But
what is he talking about?
Is he about to like shout out like Hidden Figures or?
Yeah.
But I thought it was a pretty good line by Victor.
No, yeah, I like that. That's one of the few sequences where you actually kind of get this vibe of like a unity amongst them, where there feels like there's a shared common goal. This whole time, it definitely feels like Victor has some ulterior motives. He definitely, like when they first arrive, he's like, I did it. So it's like Victor has been trying to do this for a long time, and he definitely feels some sense of ownership here. But yeah, I just, it's a different take on the origin scene. We're pulling a little bit from Ultimate Fantastic Four, where they get their powers from the negative zone. This is never called the negative zone.
They call it Planet Zero. Is that
Planet
fabrication
Zero
of this movie?
It might be. I don't know. They've probably called something Planet Zero before, but they never call it the negative zone because it doesn't feel like it's a different dimension, I guess. It just feels like a different planet. They don't really dive too deep into that. This is just, we activated this quantum tunnel and we end up on this other place. But I think it's definitely pulling from the Ultimate Marvel stuff where they don't go into space. It's more just an experiment gone wrong with the negative zone. And I expected something like that. When you're redoing it, you're always looking to make things a little bit different. But yeah, it's a very kind of, like you said, things go very, very wrong. And we get our hints of everybody getting their powers. But yeah, it was cool to watch.
Pretty cool stuff in there. It's not what I wrote down as my favorite scene of the movie. The one that I'm going with, and maybe take a walk with me here, but I'm going with the scene of Reed Richards escaping the facility after they wake up and find that they have these strange powers.
Okay.
And I'm doing that because, as we've said a few times already, this is a different take. It's not just a different take in that they're mixing up the look of the movie or how they get the powers. Like, it's a different genre of movie. They're not trying to make honestly, it's not a superhero movie. They're not out like saving civilians or anything. It's like sci-fi and horror. Honestly, it's like this, situation going wrong, and these characters like coping with it and how they find themselves in this strange new predicament scenario. So in that regards, I think this scene captures what they're going for the best.
Yes.
Okay. So Reed Richards wakes up in a facility and he's like chained down to this table, but of course his arms and legs like super outstretched. So it's kind of like spoilers for WandaVision. It's kind of like Vision on the table, and WandaVision kind of reminded me
Yeah.
of. Uh, and he wakes up. He doesn't know what's going on. He can hear Ben and like being held in another room. He doesn't know if he's a prisoner, a lab experiment, and he's scared. He breaks out and he goes through the vent, all the while like snaking his way through. The effects on a lot of the characters, but especially Reed, are kind of gross, kind of like
Yeah.
unsettling. You see him stretch a lot, and you see like his actual skin, like he's shirtless in this scene. So you see like skin stretching, and you get that body horror that Trank was going for. And he sneaks and sees Ben Grimm, who's now the Thing, and he's not like the Thing, like you were saying, not humanoid, sitting in a cell. He's like a pile of rocks that can talk. And he hears Reed's voice, and he slowly like creaks and looks up and starts to kind of form himself and break out of this pile. And Ben is also scared. He's like, "Help me! I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on." Reed says that he's going to find help, sneaks out of the event, and is kind of on the run as a fugitive after
Yeah.
that. But that sense of like waking up, what the hell is going on? What's wrong with my body? That fear, that panic. Again, I think that's what the movie was going for. And I think that's one instance where it really hits the mark.
I agree. Like if you're going to be using stuff like The Fly as your inspiration, this is definitely the scene where it feels like it's hitting that. We're definitely meant to feel. Obviously, Reed and Ben lend themselves most to that. Like with Johnny, he's not in pain when he's on fire, so it's difficult to really present that in like a super body horror-esque way. He's just kind of on fire. It's more with Johnny that he's putting other people in danger because he can't control it. And with Sue, it's just that she's phasing in and out, which, it's unsettling. But with Reed and Ben, you really get to lean into that whole unsettling aspect of it, where there's a physical change to them that looks uncomfortable. And it does hit here. Now, like I said, that definitely feels like that's what Trank was going for. So I agree that if there's a scene in this movie that kind of encapsulates the vision that he had, this is probably it.
There's a short scene in between your favorite scene and my favorite scene. And it's when they get back from exploring the other dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And before they essentially all pass out and wake up in the facility, starting my scene, there's this bit of Reed Richards coming to in the lab in the midst of this explosion of them returning, and he's looking around, and it's a horror scene. It
really is
so weird that it's in this movie. So weird that they chose the Fantastic Four of all characters to make this movie. But he looks over at Johnny Storm, and he's literally a corpse on fire. Like if you were to make a movie where someone's in a very bad car accident and they're on fire at the end, that's what he looks like on the hood of a car. He's laid out on, I think, like the door of the transport machine, and he looks dead. He's not moving.
Yep.
His body's on fire. And Reed's legs are trapped under some debris, and he hears Ben, and he's crawling towards Ben like real slowly. Reed's all bloodied up, and he looks back at where he's crawling, and his legs are stretched out. His feet are still stuck under that debris, but his legs are like 10 feet long now, all cut up. Like it's gross. And Ben, who he thinks is under a pile of rocks, is scared. He's saying, help me. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where I am. And of course, we learn that he is the pile of rocks. Like it's horrifying. It's so weird that it's in this movie, but it's a different vision. All right. We talked on the Amazing Spider-Man 2 episode about how that series intentionally made a lot of decisions to differentiate itself from the Raimi series because it was rebooted so closely after. Mm-hmm. That's clearly the case here. They are clearly making decisions to differentiate it from the Tim Story movies like times a million. There's not like a single thing that's the same. So it's completely different genres. It's not bright and colorful. It's dark and grim. Their suits are different. The Fantastic Four logo on the poster is in a square instead of a circle. Like every little thing that can be different is different. And the story they're telling, you said earlier, that first Fantastic Four movie, within 10 minutes, they've got their powers and they're planning on what they can do. This movie, the first 2/3 of the movie are just how they got their powers. It's like if you made a Spider-Man movie and the first hour was about the scientist that developed the radioactive spider.
Right.
I'm kind of making a snarky joke, but kind of not. They're kind of taking what would be the first act of a movie and stretching it out to an entire film. And it's an interesting approach. I will
It
at
is.
least say that.
It makes it different. Like I said, whether that's for better or worse is a different debate. But yeah, this movie plays the slow burn. They were finally getting into the machine to go to like the planet Zero, and I checked the timestamp, and it's like 45 minutes.
Yes.
It's almost the halfway point of the whole movie. It's kind of insane when you think about that, really, that you basically made a Fantastic Four movie that takes an hour for them to be the Fantastic Four, basically, when there's only like 30 more minutes of movie left.
I was watching the movie with my daughter, who watches a lot of these movies with me. She watched the other Fantastic Four movies with me, and that's all she knows about the characters. That was like her introduction to the Fantastic Four, is those first two movies. Right. And so we're watching the movie, and friend of the show, my wife, walks in, and she's like, "How's the movie?" And my daughter says, "This has nothing to do with the Fantastic Four." And I checked the timestamp; it was 38 minutes in, and yeah, there's what she would recognize as the Fantastic Four. None of it. Nothing in this movie whatsoever.
They were making some choices.
And that they were. Johnny Storm has a scene. His intro is he's like street racing.
Yeah.
Which I love. It, of course, reminds me of Fast and Furious. At least the earlier movies in the franchise.
Yeah.
I love these street racing scenes because like they are constantly shifting. Like there's only so many gears in a car. By the time he's going like 90, he's still like shifting gears.
Right. That's just not how cars work.
He gets into an accident. And Andrew, what happens to his car? It bursts into flames.
Notice that, did you?
Yeah. Subtlety.
You gotta wonder if they're hinting at something.
Jokes aside, though, I really like the design of the Human Torch. Again, it's differentiating itself from the Chris Evans version, where in that one, it's very much Chris Evans, and he's got like a layer of fire on top of him. In this one, he like becomes fire, and like his eyes and inside his mouth, like a bright yellow, as if he's burning from the inside. Like you don't see Michael B. Jordan when he's in Human Torch form. You see, honestly, pretty true to the comics version of the Human Torch, where he's just a man made of fire. He looks like in Street Fighter 2, whenever you use Dawson and you hit somebody with yoga fire and they burst into flame. I like Sue's powers a lot too. The Invisible Woman. Her force fields look really good. I like the purplish color that they give it all. Her phasing in and out looks really good. Special effects wise, most of this is clicking. It's working pretty well.
Yeah, works pretty well. Like I said, I talked about it already. I really like the Things look. I think that looks really, especially for the type of movie they're making, I think it's very effective. Reed's stretching, not to discredit our boy Johan at all, but it definitely looks a bit less uncanny valley than his did.
Sure, yeah.
Those scenes where he's stretched out, you're not immediately being like, oh, that's fake. Like, it is, because Miles Teller isn't 18 feet tall, but it all looks, like I said, it looks unsettling, but it's not taking you out of the film as like, oh, that looks really bad or something.
There's a few fight scenes with Reed Richards where it does look a bit rubbery, but he's a man of rubber. Like, even if it looks off, it kind of works to the character's benefit, because that's kind of who he's about. A few cool uses of his powers. I like where, he's in hiding for a year. The rest of the team is stuck in this facility, learning how to harness their powers. Thing is going on covert operations for the military. And Reed Richards is on the run, and we get a cool scene where he's buying something he doesn't want to be recognized, and he's in disguise. He's physically changed his face to look like someone else. And then when he leaves the store, he molds back to, look like Miles Teller. I was kind of wondering, like, I guess that makes sense. He can stretch. I guess he could stretch his face a bit to look like someone else. But Andrew, what's the difference between stretching and shapeshifting?
To me, if you're let me put it this way. To me, if you can shapeshift, you're changing species. Whereas with stretching, he's always still going to be human. Like, can he change skin tones?
Can he change like into a cube or a ball?
Probably.
I mean, that's not,
because that's a shape. That's not a species. He's not turning into a wolf. He would be like a weird, like tusk type looking wolf if he did that, which would be, but no, I think like it was an interesting little thing that I thought was cool. But yeah, like if you can stretch, that would obviously mean that like, you could give yourself a different looking nose. You could give yourself you could change the shape of your face basically.
Okay, but he can't like have
And also be
fur
a
or
giant
change his
ball. No,
color.
yeah. I wouldn't assume any of that in my limited experience with stretching my body.
So I mean, he's shape shifting in the literal sense of the
Yes.
term, as he can change the shape of his body at will.
Yes.
But typically, when you use shape shifting like as a power, it also includes changing color and growing.
Yeah, because when you think about shape shifting, I don't think about people stretching when they shape shift. They change into a definite thing. They go from one
Okay.
thing to another thing.
What if they made a mold? What if they made a mold of like I don't know, Brad Pitt, like a mold of him, and they put Reed Richards in it and they smashed him? Would he take the exact shape of Brad Pitt?
I would already assume that Reed Richards could take the exact shape of Brad Pitt.
You think he has that much control that he can like shape? He's a shapeshifter. If he can just become someone else.
Yes, but what shapeshifters are just stretching their arms though?
But he's not just stretching his arm. He's changing his face
But that's
to
my
look like someone
point.
else.
He's changing his face. I'm saying he is a shapeshifter, and if we're going to play by those rules,
okay,
like yes, he can shapeshift within his defined species, and then also stretch his bodies. Whereas I think shapeshifters just change their looks.
Interesting.
Asking the real questions. That's what this podcast does. On This American Life this week is Reed Richards.
My favorite fight scene of his is whenever he gets captured. He's like in the woods and he gets surrounded by like 10 guys with guns, and it's pretty short, the fight scene of him taking them out, but he's doing all the hallmarks of this type of character. He's stretching his limbs really far to punch him across. Another Dawson reference. He stretches his limbs like Dawson from Street Fighter. And at one point, someone shoots at him and he sort of bends his body and the bullet hits someone else. And then, to get taken out, the thing gets dropped into the woods and he takes him out with a headbutt. I don't get the same note. That was like the lightest headbutt ever. Like it didn't seem to have much impact to it, but he was out.
Well, to be fair, he's made of rocks, so I don't imagine it takes very much for
true.
a headbutt from the thing to be like, oh, concussion.
There is. We're going to get to the climax of this movie because it's different. It gives a bit of whiplash. That's a whole conversation unto itself. But
it's another Ghostbusters ending.
The military decides to use this machine and go to the other dimension, and they're trying to harness that power to make more metahumans. And on this other, in Planet Zero, they find that Victor's still alive. He comes up to him and he kind of looks like Dr. Doom. His skin is sort of turned to metal. He's wearing a hood. He's evoking the look. It is quite a departure. But at any rate, they find out he's alive. And back at headquarters, they're watching on the monitors. And Franklin Storm says, Victor? And Tim Blake Nelson, I swear this is what he says. He says, "Unpossible." I replayed it and watched it twice. I can't help but think of Ralph Wiggum.
Me fail English? That's impossible.
Oh, well, the shoe fits.
And so we get, Dr. Doom's entrance, kind of learn about his powers. They try to capture and study him like they did the rest of the team. But whenever he wakes up, Tim Blake Nelson walks into the room. He's like a hazmat suit on. And they learn that Dr. Doom, because he spent so much time on the other planet, I guess, is like crazy powerful. The way he kills people, they erupt from the inside. I don't even know. Like Tim Blake Nelson's character dies.
It's a scanner's thing. He just blows up their heads.
Yeah, like blood just splatters on the visor and he drops dead. Like it's pretty brutal for a PG-13 movie.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of skeptical here as to whether or not Victor was like passed out, or it sounds more like it was his plan to like get taken and then kind of infiltrate and blow it all up and then all of that. But yeah, we get another look at Doom, who doesn't look all that different from how Doom kind of does at the end of the first Tim Story movie, where it's like weird metal things of just, they say that his environmental suit like molded to his body.
Yeah.
And he ends up kind of not looking that different than Julian McMahon does at the end of that movie. And you're not really given a good scope of what his powers are, but he ends up basically jumping back to Planet Zero and opening up this portal that's eventually going to turn Earth into a black hole, basically.
Sky portal. Hollywood loves a good sky portal, don't they? Especially in superhero movies.
Suddenly, that Avengers influence comes back really hard.
Yes. We will see it again when we talk about Suicide Squad.
Another movie that has Ghostbusters as its ending.
All movies have Ghostbusters to you, Andrew.
All movies end exactly the same as Ghostbusters.
Yeah. So that scene of Victor walking down the hallway and just killing everyone that he lays his eyes on. It's pretty intense, pretty brutal. I mean,
Yeah.
Doctor Doom, he's the big bad, right? He's one of the biggest bads in Marvel. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is like an accurate adaptation in that regards. There's a lot of, from the visuals to everything else, there's a lot of departures. But at the very least, he is an extremely powerful being who's a major threat and certainly takes a team up of superheroes to take down. They build him up well in that regards. Like he is something that, they say as much into the movie, like one of us can't beat him. It takes all of us. They have a big superhero team up moment. And, I believe that it would take a lot of work to bring this guy down.
Dare I say a team of 4? But yes.
What would you call such a team, Andrew?
The Human Torch and the Torchettes.
Nailed it. Perfect.
But yeah, this builds to them kind of all working together because they all do try to take them on by themselves, and they all fail. It's very much that Ninja Turtles versus Shredder fight where they decide to all fight them one at a time and they all fail miserably. Why don't you just fight them all together, guys? Well, they don't make that mistake in this movie. They finally realize the key is fighting them all at once, and they succeed. They throw Victor back into his own sky portal where he seemingly disintegrates. Yeah,
so let's break this down a little bit. Most of this movie, like I said, is not even trying to be a superhero movie, but in this final act, when it comes time to bring down Victor Von Doom, Andrew, we know there's reshoots on this movie. Pretty sure this is what the studio wanted. They wanted a more conventional superhero ending, superhero fight. And it shows in the scenes, the action scenes, it shows in the dialogue. Reed Richards becomes a leader. Thing says, we can't beat him. He's stronger than any of us. And Reed says, yeah, he is, but he's not stronger than all of us. And he gives a big pep talk that ends with, maybe this is who we're meant to be. It's dialogue that could have been in any of the Fantastic Four movies at this point. At this point, they're just reverting back to that classic dynamic of the team. So much so that the Thing says his line. He says it's clobbering time, which given how different this movie has been, it's interesting. They found their way to make it back to a line that's silly and goofy for the Thing. I do
they referenced it earlier. I don't know if you caught that.
Oh, I didn't catch an early reference.
When he shows up at the junkyard as a kid, his older brother comes to he back talks him, and his older brother comes running after him, and he says, it's clobbering time. And then their mom beats up their older brother and is like, what are you doing? And it's like,
catchphrase origins.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I don't know why suddenly he would bring it back later, but he does. I guess because now he's fighting the bully or whatever. But
I do like that scene though of them taking him out, like how they used all the powers together is pretty cool.
Yeah.
They establish early on that the Invisible Woman has the ability to make other objects invisible, and she makes the Thing invisible. So while Dr. Doom is busy fighting Reed Richards and has him at his mercy, the Thing is able to run up on him invisible, and then at the last second turns visible, says his line, and punches him into the portal. If you're going to do a superhero climax with the Fantastic Four, that's a good way to do it.
It is indeed.
The movie wraps up very quickly after this. They eliminate Von Doom. He seemingly disintegrates into this portal. It's superheroes. You got to imagine if the series continued, they would find a way to bring him back. But you see him turn into a bunch of little bits. And then they make a deal with the military to just be left alone to do their work, is how they put it. They put him up in this big facility that gets referenced as Central City. Andrew, is this a comic book thing?
My comic book knowledge of Central City is that's where Barry Allen lives.
That's kind of what I thought, which they told us like it's a big reveal of a name. So, if any of you out there know what that reference is, let us know. bachelorspot@gmail.com. I'd like to know what they're teasing us with, but they end with the Fantastic Four overlooking this new facility that they get to work in. And they get a bit of cheeky dialogue here, Andrew. A bit of fun
Yes.
to end the movie, where Reed is telling them we should have a name, the four of us, because there's four of us and we're a team. And they throw some ideas out there. Human Torch and the Torchettes is one of them. And then the Thing just says, I gotta say, it's fantastic. And Reed, he gets struck with inspiration. He says, say that again. And Thing says, I said it's fantastic. And Reed says, yeah, that's it. I got it, guys. You ready? Then Andrew, before he can say the name, he cuts to credits.
It reminds me of Avengers Age of Ultron, where right at the end, it sounds like Captain America is going to say Avengers Assemble, and then it cuts to the credits instead of letting them finish.
And I would say the anticipation for
Yes.
hearing the name of this team was just as big as Marvel fans waiting to finally hear Avengers Assemble on the big screen.
Some say even more.
Okay, hang on, wait a minute. We are sliding into snark, Andrew. This is a hashtag positivity podcast.
You're right. You're right.
We've
I
got to bring
apologize.
this back around. We've got to end strong. Man, this movie is strange. It is
Very strange.
it's one thing to do the deconstruction of a superhero. It's one
Sure.
thing to make it dark and gritty and grim and what would this be like in real life? I get all that. There's a place for it. It's a strange choice to make it the Fantastic Four.
I agree. I think, but I think from Fox's perspective, I can't necessarily say this was a good intuition. I think obviously the darker films had some success at the time. Obviously, Chronicle was a big success, and obviously you're wanting to differentiate yourself from what you did before. So I think a combination of those things lands you here, for better or worse.
For better or worse. And I will say, if that is your goal, this movie mostly succeeds at that goal. The first 2/3 of this movie, man, you like it or not, that's for you to decide, but it's working in the sense that it's doing what it set out to do. We're getting
Right.
we're getting that body horror that Trank wanted to do. We're getting that deconstruction. We're getting that, they're not superheroes. They're just people trying to come to terms with what they can do with these new powers and what it means for their life. Like, it's asking all those questions. It's building to something.
Right.
It's obvious whatever that original something was, we didn't get to see. I mean, Josh Trank said that it would have been great and been great that you reviewed. Of course, he says that it's his movie, but there's been some other people, some other insiders that have knowledge of that original ending and agree that at the very least it would be a better movie than the one that we got.
Certainly create a more cohesive experience.
That original ending wasn't actually saw to completion. There were rewrites before that and special effects that weren't finished. So we will never see it. There's no director's cut that's eventually going to come out.
This is not a Snyder cut situation.
Right. Nor do I think there's as big of an avid fan base asking for it. But all we have is what we have in front of us here. And man, I can't say that this is one of the movies that I look at and I think that, oh man, that Rotten Tomato score should be way higher. How did we get here? This is misunderstood. It's none of that.
No.
But
But
there are some things to like. Special effects,
Yes.
mostly great. The designs, the characters, the powers, the way they look are all pretty awesome. Like, I don't love that their suits are essentially just all black suits, kind of like X-Men. I always want something a little bit more imaginative than that. But them using the powers, the Human Torch in his form, the Thing looks excellent. Like, the special effects look really good. I love Sue's force fields. I mean, some of these powers, I get the feeling when we eventually see these characters in the MCU are going to look a lot like what we saw here. Unfortunately, it's basically just a story that doesn't have a true ending.
right. I also really like the cast. I think by and large,
Yeah.
maybe none of them are given the material to really elevate this movie up, but I think the cast was great. I know obviously there was some controversy when it was announced because one of the things the movie does is Sue is adopted, basically. Sue is the adopted brother of Johnny and
Sister, some would say.
sister, yes. Sue is the adopted daughter of Franklin. So there was that Ripple ad, and I remember people were really upset about that. But I appreciate that the movie just it doesn't really call that out or make it a big deal. It's just like
Yeah.
she's adopted, and that's all there is to it. And I think that's a nice thing to put into the movie. Creates an interesting new dynamic, and also Michael B. Jordan is the greatest actor of our time. So
Yeah.
it's all working for me as far as the cast goes. Does make me wish that the script gave them a little bit more to work with. But like you said, it's kind of a movie that just it's a tale of two movies. It really is. Like there's a certain you can kind of feel in the movie when it changes, when it suddenly is like, oh, we need to get back to superheroes, and it kind of just really takes a hard right into that. But before then, like I said, the story it's telling may not be to everyone's liking, but it's achieving what it's set out to do. Like I said, the conversation about what it's doing is different. But if you're talking a movie that's inspired by David Cronenberg, that first 2/3 of the movie is definitely that. You feel it. Another thing I do want to point out, Philip Glass, a very prominent composer, does contribute some to the score for this movie, and the stuff that he does is all pretty, stick with me if you will, amazing. Wait, I screwed it up. Sorry. Fantastic.
Hey.
I have nothing else to say.
Look, I think I gotta get us out of here. I think we gotta wrap it on Fantastic Four. Boy, this podcast is sometimes a challenge, but you know what? I had a good time. This movie, let me summarize it by saying this. It has to be seen to be believed.
Yes.
I knew nothing about this movie except its reputation. I was not prepared for the movie that I got. I'm honestly glad I watched it. I'm glad I saw this weird thing that they sought out to make. In that way, Andrew, I dare say it's worth watching.
I feel like that's an act that is a correct summation. I think there is it needs to be experienced. I think you truly do need to watch it because it feels like something that I could explain it to you and you're not going to understand. But watching it, I think you will. So in that regard, I definitely agree.
And when you're done watching this movie, head on over to Apple Podcast and leave us a review for this show. We would certainly appreciate that. It's super nice of you, but honestly, it helps the show a lot with algorithms and getting discovered by new people. And we just like hearing nice things about us, to be honest with you. I want to ask you to go one step farther and leave a review for every podcast that you listen to. Reviews like this one from Emalu to you too. Here's what they have to say. The best, most positive superhero movie podcast. If you enjoy superhero movies, this podcast is a must listen. I can't stress enough how great the show is, injecting positivity into an otherwise toxic world of mediocre superhero movie coverage. Sure, not all superhero movies are perfect, but there's a ton of great things about each movie. The hosts are huge movie buffs and cover both the content of the movie as well as the making of, with fun facts and behind the scenes knowledge sewn throughout. Please check out this show. Yeah, and if you're listening to us, you have checked out this show, and we thank you for that. And thank you to Emalu, to you too, for that review. Boy, that was fun to say. And don't forget, jump into that Discord. We are going to watch a movie together. We will be watching The Punisher, 1989, starring the man who played the father of the villain of Creed 2, who faced off against Adonis Creed, played by Michael B. Jordan, who's in this movie as Johnny Storm. Huh? Connected it with 5 degrees.
He means Dolph Lundgren, folks.
Dolph Lundgren plays Frank Castle in the Punisher movie we're going to watch together. So hop into that Discord if you haven't already. It's got to be a good time. My God, we got to get out of here. Andrew, remember, maybe not all movies are great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thank you to Mitch of Depressed to Impressed for the music. Check him out on YouTube and Twitch.tv. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. We certainly appreciate it. It's the only way we're going to grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. This movie, let me summarize it by saying this. Is summarize a word?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Right, well, I just downed 3 Reese's Pumpkins and half a Mr. Pibb, so I'm good to go. I'm jacked. I'm jacked to the tits.
Is the Reese's pumpkin like the eggs, but pumpkin shaped?
Yes, it's the eggs for Easter. It's the pumpkins for Halloween. I don't think there's Christmas ones, even though there should be. Because much like the holiday-themed Oreos, the holiday-themed Reese's are better.
I can, sure. They're like soft. Like like the regular cups, like you gotta. There's a snap when you bite into it, but like the soft.
With these guys, it's just chocolate and peanut butter molding my mouth shut.
Yeah, it's good.